"If you touch that piece, sir, you will lose everything." The voice came low and urgent. It was almost a whisper, but in that silent office it sounded louder than thunder. Lucas froze. His fingers were still resting on the black chess piece in front of him. His hand was shaking. Sweat ran down the side of his face and soaked the collar of his expensive grey shirt. The air conditioner in the executive boardroom was working, but it did not matter. Fear has its own heat. Across from him, Oliver leaned back in his chair with a slow, mocking smile. He was dressed in simple white native clothes, and in front of him sat a small leather bag tied with a red cord. The bag held the herbs he claimed could wake Lucas's daughter from a coma. Around them, a few staff members stood at a careful distance, too afraid to speak, too curious to leave. And nobody moved, nobody even coughed. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Tick, tick, tick. Lucas stared at the chessboard. One wrong move, and Ironcrest Holdings, the company he built with 25 years of sleepless nights, sacrifice and stubborn hope, would no longer belong to him. One wrong move, and everything would be gone. But that was not even the worst part. The worst part was upstairs in his mind, always upstairs. His daughter, Lisa, lying still, eyes closed, 3 whole months. 3 months of beeping machines, whispered medical reports, and doctors using careful words that meant terrible things. She may never wake up. Lucas swallowed hard, then slowly he turned his head toward the voice. It came from behind him. A young man in a faded blue shirt and worn-out black trousers was bent slightly at the waist. His shoes were dusty. His sleeves were a little too short for his arms. His hair was rough, like he had cut it himself with no mirror. He looked like somebody who had learned very early not to expect kindness from the world. Richard, the company cleaner, the one workers called the rejected boy. Lucas had heard that cruel nickname many times. Some said Richard was found as a baby near a drainage channel in Ajagunle, wrapped in an old wrapper. Some said both parents abandoned him. Some said nobody even knew his real surname. He grew up moving from one hard place to another, from church shelter to mechanic yard, from one hungry week to the next. People said many things, but right now, Richard's eyes were fixed on the board with a kind of focus that did not match his job at all. And Lucas, for one strange second, felt something shift inside him. Before that moment, before that whisper, before that dangerous game, there was another room, another silence, another pain. 3 months earlier, on a rainy Sunday evening in Ikoyi, Lisa had collapsed in the middle of her birthday dinner. She had just turned 21. Lucas remembered every ugly detail of that night with painful sharpness. The silver spoon slipping from her fingers, the sound it made hitting the marble floor, the shocked cry from one of the maids, the birthday cake still glowing with tiny candles while Lisa's body slumped sideways in her chair. At first, Lucas thought she had fainted. Then he saw her lips. Too still. Too pale. He had screamed her name so loudly, the security men outside ran in. "Lisa!" She did not answer. He had carried her himself to the car, even though his driver kept begging him to let go. By the time they reached St. Catherine's Hospital in Victoria Island, Lucas was no longer thinking like a billionaire. He was not thinking about image or control or dignity. He was just a father. A terrified father. Doctors rushed her inside, machines were connected, specialists came and went. The diagnosis sounded like a punishment from the sky. A rare brain inflammation, severe complications, deep coma. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into 3 months. Lucas tried everything, private neurologists from Lagos and Abuja, a specialist flown in from London, prayer vigils in church, anointing oil from a famous pastor in Port Harcourt. He even visited an elderly woman in Abeokuta people said had healing gifts. She prayed over a handkerchief and told him to place it under Lisa's pillow. Nothing changed. Every morning, Lucas went to her room before going to work. Every night, he returned to sit by her bed. He would hold her hand and tell her small things, foolish things, normal things. The hibiscus flowers outside your window have opened. Your cat scratched my sofa again. I fired the cook who keeps over-salting soup. You would have laughed. Sometimes he talked until midnight. Sometimes he broke down halfway and could not finish. And still Lisa did not move. The mansion changed because of her silence. Even the staff spoke softly now. No music played in the sitting room, no television noise, no laughter from the kitchen. All pain had settled there like dust. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Lucas's head of domestic staff, an older woman named Mama Bisi, came to his office doorway and stood there wringing her hands. "Sir," she said carefully, "there is someone people talk about. A man named Oliver." Lucas did not even look up from the medical file in front of him. "If this is another prophet, don't start." "He is not a prophet, sir," Mama Bisi said. "They say he uses herbs, real herbs, strange ones. Some people say he has made very sick people recover." Lucas laughed, but there was no joy in it. By then, hope had become dangerous. Hope was the thing that made you get up and try again, only to return and feel more broken. "People say many things," he muttered. "Yes, sir," she replied, "but this one, I heard the story from my cousin in Ibadan, and a child who could not speak began speaking. A man who had been bedridden stood up." Lucas closed the file. He wanted to dismiss her. He wanted to say, enough. Enough with the miracle stories. Enough with the false comfort. Enough with people taking a father's pain and dressing it in cheap promises. But then he thought of Lisa's face on the hospital bed that had now become her room bed at home. Still, lovely, silent, and his voice came out weaker than he wanted. "Bring him." Oliver arrived 2 days later. He was not old as Lucas expected, not even close. He looked to be in his early 40s. His beard was trimmed, his eyes were sharp and strangely amused, like he enjoyed walking into rooms where desperate people waited for him. He did not bow much, he did not beg for favor. That alone annoyed Lucas. In the grand sitting room, Oliver stood before Lisa's framed portrait and nodded once. "I can help," he said. Lucas stood so fast his chair almost fell. "You can wake her." Oliver lifted a finger. "I said I can help, but I do not move for pity. I move for terms." Lucas stared at him. "What terms?" Oliver's lips curved. "We play chess." Lucas actually thought he misheard him. "Excuse me?" "One game," Oliver said calmly. "If you win, I use my herbs and ask for nothing. If I win, your company becomes mine." The room went still. Mama Bisi gasped. One of the security men near the door looked up sharply. Lucas stepped closer. "You are insane." Oliver did not flinch. "No, I am confident." "You want me to gamble my life's work while my daughter lies unconscious? I want to know how badly you want her back." Lucas felt hot anger rise inside him. He should have thrown the man out. He should have called security that second. But Oliver kept speaking in that same awful, calm voice. "You have gone to doctors, pastors, specialists, prayer houses, and foreign experts. None of them woke her. Yet you still called me. That means deep inside, you believe I may be the last door left." Lucas said nothing, because that part was true, and the truth can be cruel when it comes from the wrong mouth. Oliver leaned closer. "If your daughter is worth more than your company, then sit across from me." That night, Lucas did not sleep. He sat alone in his study in Banana Island, staring at old pictures of Lisa. Lisa at 7, missing front teeth, grinning beside a bicycle. Lisa at 12, proudly holding a debate trophy. Lisa at 16, one angry because he would not let her travel to Dubai with friends. Lisa at 19, hugging him from behind and saying, "Daddy, when you frown like this, you look like an angry principal." He laughed at that memory. Then he cried. He cried in a way he would never allow in public. By morning, his eyes were red. At 10 a.m., Oliver arrived at Lucas's company headquarters in Victoria Island. The boardroom was cleared. The chessboard was set. Legal papers were drawn up. If Lucas lost, the transfer process would begin. His lawyer begged him not to do it. "This is madness, sir." Lucas signed anyway. For Lisa. Only for Lisa. Now the game had reached its most dangerous point. Oliver had been playing with frightening ease, moving like a man who had seen the end from the beginning. Lucas, who only knew chess casually from old university days, was barely surviving, and now his hand hovered over the piece that would ruin him. Then came that whisper, "If you touch that piece, sir, you will lose everything." Lucas slowly turned. Richard was still bent beside him. His eyes were steady now, not fearful, not confused. Steady. And before anyone else could stop him, the poor rejected boy leaned even closer and whispered something else into Lucas's ear. Something that made Lucas's eyes widen in complete shock. "If you move that knight, sir, he will trap your king in 3 moves." Lucas felt a cold wave rush through his chest. For a moment, he forgot where he was. He forgot the staff standing behind him. He forgot Oliver watching him with that quiet, confident smile. All he could hear was the steady breathing of the young man beside him. Richard, the rejected boy. Lucas slowly looked back down at the chessboard. His fingers were still hovering over the black knight. He had been sure it was the right move. But now he saw something strange, something he had not noticed before. If the knight moved forward, Oliver's bishop would slide across the board. Then the queen would trap the king. 3 moves. Exactly 3. Lucas swallowed. His throat suddenly felt dry. He slowly pulled his hand away from the chess piece. Across the table, Oliver's smile disappeared for just 1 second. Only 1 second. But Lucas saw it, and in that small moment, something inside him began to shift. Hope. Dangerous hope. Lucas turned slightly and looked at Richard. The young man's clothes were rough and faded. His shirt had a small tear near the shoulder. His shoes looked like they had survived many rainy streets. But his eyes were sharp, focused. Lucas lowered his voice. "You understand this game?" Richard hesitated. For a second, the old fear returned to his face. The fear of speaking where he was not supposed to speak. The fear of being chased away. But then he nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Lucas leaned closer. "How?" Richard glanced at the chessboard again. "I learned when I used to sleep at the mechanic workshop in Ajagunle," he said quietly. Lucas frowned. "The mechanic shop?" "Yes, sir." His voice was calm now. "There was an old customer who used to come every evening. He fixed radios, while he waited for his car, and he would play chess alone on a small wooden board. One day he asked if I wanted to learn." Richard paused. "He said chess teaches the mind to see the future before it happens." Lucas stared at him. "And you learned just like that?" Richard gave a small shrug. "I watched him every day." The room remained silent. Behind them, 2 company staff exchanged confused glances. Oliver tapped his fingers on the table slowly. Tap, tap, tap. Then he leaned forward. "Mr. Lucas," he said calmly, "are we continuing the game? Or are we now holding a storytelling session?" The sarcasm in his voice cut through the room. Lucas turned back toward him. Oliver's eyes shifted briefly toward Richard, and this time the smile returned, but it was colder. "Oh," Oliver said softly, "I see the company cleaner has suddenly become a chess advisor." A few staff members shifted uncomfortably. Richard lowered his head slightly. Years of being judged had trained him to expect ridicule. But Lucas was not smiling. He looked at Oliver carefully. "You are confident I will lose?" Oliver spread his hands. "I am certain." Lucas leaned back in his chair. His eyes slowly moved between the chessboard and Richard. Then he made a decision. A very strange decision. "Stand up," Lucas said quietly. The entire room froze. Even Oliver blinked. Lucas pushed his chair backward and stood. Then he turned toward Richard. "You said that move would make me lose." "Yes, sir." Lucas stared at him for 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then he did something nobody expected. "Take my seat." The words landed in the room like thunder. What?" one of the staff whispered. Richard looked like someone had just poured cold water on his head. "Sir, I can't." Lucas raised his hand. "You said you could see the trap." "Yes, sir, but—" "Then take my seat." Richard's heart started beating fast. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room staring at him. For years he had been invisible, just the boy who swept floors, just the boy who cleaned toilets, just the boy who carried trash bags out the back door. Now suddenly he was standing in the middle of the most important room in the building, facing a chessboard that could decide the fate of a billion-naira company. His hands trembled slightly. "Sir, this is your company." Lucas's voice was quiet. My daughter is more important. Those words silenced the room. Even Oliver stopped tapping his fingers. Lucas pointed at the chair. Sit. Richard slowly lowered himself into the seat. The leather chair felt strange under him. Too soft. Too expensive. Too important. Across the board, Oliver studied him. His eyes traveled from Richard's dusty shoes to the worn shirt, to the uncertain hands hovering above the chess pieces. Then Oliver laughed, not loudly, but mockingly. Oh, this is even better. Some staff members shifted nervously. Oliver leaned forward. You are letting a cleaner play for you. Lucas did not respond. Oliver continued. A boy in torn clothes? Still no answer. Oliver smiled wider. Well, that will make my victory much faster. Richard lifted his head slowly. Their eyes met. For the first time, Oliver's smile paused. Because the boy in front of him did not look confused. He looked focused. Very focused. Richard studied the board for a long moment. The pieces were arranged in a tense battle. Oliver had built a strong attack, but something was slightly wrong. A small weakness. Hidden. Richard remembered the old radio repairman's voice from years ago. Every strong attack has a blind spot. He moved his first piece. Click. The sound echoed across the board. Oliver raised an eyebrow. Interesting. The game continued, move after move. At first, Oliver played casually, almost bored. But 5 minutes later, his posture changed. His shoulders leaned forward. 10 minutes later, his eyes narrowed. 15 minutes later, the room felt different. The staff watching behind Lucas began whispering quietly. Did you see that? He blocked the queen. How? Richard's face remained calm, but inside, his mind was racing. Every move opened a new path. Every path showed a new danger. He could almost hear the old man's voice again. Never chase victory too fast. Let your opponent reveal his fear. Oliver made a move. Richard responded immediately. Oliver paused. The pause grew longer. Then Oliver leaned back slowly. The mocking smile had disappeared. Now his eyes were sharp, serious. Where did you learn this? He asked quietly. Richard did not answer. He moved another piece. Click. Gasps filled the room. Oliver stared at the board. Then he laughed again. But this time the laugh sounded different. Not mocking, surprised. Very clever. He moved his queen forward, but the moment his fingers left the piece, Richard moved instantly. Click. Oliver's eyes widened. One staff member whispered loudly, oh my God. Oliver leaned closer to the board. For the first time since the game began, sweat appeared on his forehead. He stared at the position for several seconds. Then he looked up slowly. At Richard. You planned that? Richard remained silent. Oliver's lips tightened. Then Richard moved one final piece. Click. The sound felt like thunder. The entire room froze. Oliver stared at the board. His king had nowhere to go. One move, only one. And that move meant defeat. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Oliver slowly leaned back in his chair. His eyes were locked on the board. Then he whispered something under his breath. Finally, he looked up, directly at Richard. And for the first time since he entered the building, Oliver did not look amused. He looked shocked. Because the poor, rejected cleaner had just done something impossible. And Lucas was only now beginning to understand that the quiet boy everyone ignored might have just saved everything. But Oliver suddenly leaned forward again, studied the board one more time, and then said something that made the entire room uneasy. Interesting. Very interesting. He tapped one piece slowly. But are you sure this is really the end? But are you sure this is really the end? Oliver's voice was soft. Too soft. The room suddenly felt colder. Richard did not answer immediately. He stared at the chessboard again. Every piece, every square, every possible path. He had learned something very important years ago from the old radio repairman who taught him chess. Never celebrate too early. And a smart opponent always hides one last trap. Richard leaned closer to the board. Lucas stood behind him now, watching carefully. His heart was beating fast. He was not a chess master, but he could see something clearly. Oliver was stalling, trying to find a way out. The entire boardroom remained silent. Even the air conditioner sounded louder than before. Finally, Richard spoke quietly. Yes. Oliver raised an eyebrow. Yes. What? Richard lifted his head and looked directly at him. Yes, sir, I am sure. A small murmur spread through the staff standing behind them. Oliver smiled again, but this time the smile looked forced. He leaned forward and studied the board again. 30 seconds passed. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The silence grew heavy. Then Oliver slowly reached out and moved his king. A weak move. A desperate move. The moment his fingers left the piece, Richard moved instantly. Click. The sound echoed in the room. Richard pushed his rook forward, and the board changed forever. Oliver stared at it. Then he leaned back slowly. His shoulders dropped. For the first time since the game began, he exhaled deeply. Checkmate. One of the secretaries near the door gasped. Another staff member covered his mouth. Lucas felt his knees weaken. He looked down at the board. It was true. Oliver's king was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The poor cleaner had just defeated a man who had played like a professional. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room exploded with shocked whispers. How did he do that? Did you see that move? That boy. He finished him. Lucas suddenly placed both hands on Richard's shoulders. The young man flinched slightly. He was not used to people touching him kindly. Lucas's voice was shaking. You won. Richard nodded slowly. Yes, sir. Lucas laughed, not the calm laugh of a billionaire, but the wild laugh of a father who had just seen a door open after months of darkness. Across the table, Oliver stood up slowly. He looked at Richard carefully. Long, thoughtful, then he extended his hand. You are very good. Richard hesitated, but then he shook Oliver's hand. Oliver turned toward Lucas. A deal is a deal. Lucas stepped forward immediately. My daughter. Oliver picked up the small leather herb bag from the table. I will keep my word. The staff watched in stunned silence as the three men left the boardroom together. The drive to Lucas's mansion in Ikoyi felt longer than usual, and nobody spoke much. Richard sat quietly in the back seat of the car. He kept staring out the window. He had never ridden in such an expensive vehicle before. The leather seat smelled new. The ride was smooth, too smooth. Inside, his heart was still beating fast. He did not understand why Lucas had trusted him. But he knew one thing. If that game had gone wrong, everything would have been destroyed. Meanwhile, Lucas sat beside Oliver in the front seat. He could barely breathe. Every minute felt like an hour. When the car finally stopped in front of the mansion gates, Lucas jumped out before the driver could even open the door. Come, he said urgently. They walked quickly into the house. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was still heavy with quiet worry. Mama Bisi rushed forward when she saw them. Aye, sir, Lucas spoke quickly. He won the game. Her eyes widened. And the girl? Oliver stepped forward calmly. Take me to her. They climbed the staircase quickly. Lisa's room door opened slowly. The familiar quiet smell of medicine filled the air. Lisa lay on the bed, still, peaceful, too still. Her long hair spread gently across the pillow. The machine beside her made soft beeping sounds. Lucas walked slowly to the bed and held her hand. Lisa. Daddy is here. No response. Oliver walked closer. He placed the leather bag on the table. Then he untied the red cord slowly. Inside the bag were several dried herbs, small leaves, and a tiny wooden bowl. Richard watched from the doorway. His chest felt tight. He did not know much about herbs, but he could see something serious was about to happen. Oliver crushed several herbs together inside the bowl. The smell filled the room quickly, strong, earthy, almost bitter. Then he added a few drops of water and mixed the herbs into a thick green liquid. Lucas's voice trembled. Will this work? Oliver looked at him calmly. You won the game. He lifted Lisa's head slightly, carefully. Then he squeezed a small amount of the herbal liquid into her mouth. Everyone in the room held their breath. The seconds stretched painfully. Nothing happened. Lucas felt fear rising again. Oliver. Then suddenly, Lisa's chest moved sharply. Cough. The sound shocked everyone. Mama Bisi gasped loudly. Lisa coughed again, her fingers twitched. Lucas froze. Lisa! Her eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, very slowly, Lisa opened her eyes. The room exploded with emotion. Mama Bissy burst into tears. Lucas dropped to his knees beside the bed. Lisa, my baby. Lisa looked confused. Her voice was weak. Daddy. Lucas held her hand tightly. Yes, yes, Daddy is here. Tears streamed down his face. Behind him, Richard stood quietly. He could not stop smiling. For the first time in months, the mansion no longer felt like a place of sorrow. Life had returned. 1 week later, the house looked completely different. Laughter returned. Music played again in the sitting room. Doctors confirmed that Lisa's recovery was progressing well. Lucas felt like a man who had been given a second life. And he did not forget the person who had helped save everything. One afternoon in his office, Lucas called Richard inside. The young man walked in slowly, still shy, still unsure. Lucas looked at him carefully. You saved my company. Richard shook his head quickly. No, sir, I only played a game. Lucas smiled. That game saved my daughter. He pushed a document across the table. I want you to work for me. Richard blinked in surprise. Sir, you will no longer clean floors here. Lucas leaned back in his chair. You will become my secretary. Richard's mouth slowly opened. I never went to university. Lucas nodded. I know. He pushed another paper forward. This is your admission form. Richard stared at the paper. Lucas continued, you will study through distance learning. The company will pay for everything. Richard's eyes began to fill with tears. Nobody had ever believed in him like this before. Lucas stood and extended his hand. Unwelcome to a new life. Richard shook his hand slowly, but neither of them knew something important. Because upstairs in the mansion, Lisa was slowly recovering. And every time Richard came to deliver documents or messages, Lisa had begun noticing him. The quiet boy, the one who saved everything. And soon, something unexpected would begin to grow between them, something Lucas would never see coming. Years passed faster than anyone expected. At first, life in Lucas's mansion felt like a miracle that had not yet settled. Lisa slowly regained her strength. Her voice became stronger. Her laughter returned to the house like sunlight after a long storm. Doctors said her recovery was extraordinary. Lucas did not argue. Every morning he still walked into her room, sometimes just to make sure she was truly awake, truly alive. Sometimes he would sit beside her bed and smile quietly, remembering the day she coughed and opened her eyes, the day everything changed, and every time that memory returned, one face always appeared in it. Richard, the boy nobody wanted, the boy everyone ignored, the boy who saved everything. Richard's life changed too. At first, he could barely believe it. The company cleaner had suddenly become the personal secretary to one of Nigeria's most powerful businessmen. His first week in the new office was awkward. The chair felt too important. The office felt too clean. The staff who once ignored him now greeted him carefully, some with respect, some with confusion, and some with jealousy. But Richard worked quietly. He arrived early. He studied documents carefully. And every night after work, he attended his distance learning university classes online. Sometimes he studied until 2 a.m. because deep inside him lived a fear that the life he now had could disappear if he stopped trying. Lucas watched him closely, and slowly. The older man began to trust him more and more. Richard handled schedules. He organized meetings. He helped prepare reports. Within 2 years, he became one of the most reliable people in the company. Lucas even began introducing him to investors. This is Richard, he would say, my most trusted assistant. Each time he said that, Richard felt a strange warmth in his chest, because nobody had ever called him trusted before. Meanwhile, Lisa returned to school. The illness had delayed her studies, but she refused to give up. Lucas supported her fully. He had almost lost her once, and he was never going to rush her again. 4 years passed. Lisa graduated from the University of Lagos with a degree in business administration. The graduation ceremony was bright and loud. Parents cheered. Students took pictures everywhere. Lucas stood proudly in the crowd. When Lisa's name was called, he clapped the loudest. and standing a few steps behind him was Richard, quiet as usual, but smiling, because he remembered the hospital machines, the silence, the fear. Now Lisa was walking across a stage with confidence. Life had come full circle. After graduation, Lucas invited Lisa to join the company. "You must learn how the business works," he told her. Lisa agreed, and that was when something unexpected began. Lisa and Richard started working together. At first it was simple: meetings, documents, company tours. Richard helped explain the structure of the company. Lisa admired how organized he was. He admired how thoughtful she was. Sometimes they laughed about small mistakes. Sometimes they stayed late to finish reports. Sometimes they simply sat in silence, both focused on their work. But slowly, something deeper grew. A quiet friendship. Then something warmer. One evening, after a long meeting with investors, the two of them sat outside the company building, watching the sunset over Victoria Island. The sky was orange. The traffic hummed far away. Lisa looked at him. "You saved my life." Richard shook his head immediately. "No, Oliver's herbs saved you." Lisa smiled. "But you saved the game." Richard said nothing. Lisa continued. My father once told me something." "What?" "He said the smartest move he ever made in his life was standing up from that chess chair." Richard laughed softly. "That was a risky move." Lisa nodded. "But it gave him back his daughter." They both fell silent again. Then Lisa said something that surprised even herself. "I'm glad it was you." Richard looked at her. Their eyes met, and something quietly changed between them that night. Months passed. Their friendship became stronger. Long conversations, shared meals, small jokes. Slowly, they fell in love. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently. Like two people who had already seen enough pain to understand the value of peace. Finally, one evening, Richard went to Lucas's office. His heart was beating very fast. Lucas looked up from his documents. "Yes, one Richard." Richard stood straight. "Sir, I need to speak with you." Lucas noticed the seriousness in his voice. "Go ahead." Richard took a deep breath. "I love Lisa." Lucas froze. The words sat in the room like heavy stones. Richard continued. "I want to marry her." For a moment, Lucas said nothing. Then he slowly leaned back in his chair. His face was calm, but his eyes had changed. "You love my daughter?" "Yes, sir." Lucas stood up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the Lagos skyline glowed under the evening lights. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I see you like a son." Richard felt his chest tighten. Lucas continued, "That is why this cannot happen." The words hit Richard like cold rain. "Sir," Lucas turned, "I raised Lisa with everything I had. And I nearly lost her once." His voice trembled slightly. You are part of my family, but not in that way." Richard lowered his head. Lucas spoke again. "You deserve respect. You deserve success. But marriage between you and Lisa? No." The room fell silent. Richard nodded slowly. "I understand." But deep inside him, his heart was breaking. That night, Lucas sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home. The building was quiet. He walked slowly to the chessboard, sitting on a small table beside his desk. The same board from that unforgettable game. He looked at the pieces, then he whispered to himself, "The boy who saved everything." He remembered Richard's whisper, "If you make that move, you will lose everything." Lucas sighed. Sometimes the hardest battles in life are not played on a chessboard. They happen inside the human heart. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.